does emotions and learning have to do with each other? I guess the first question we need to ask yourself is, what is learning? Consider a teacher you've had in the past, someone who's made an impact on your life, someone who you still think fondly of today, or perhaps it's the opposite, someone who had maybe a negative impact on your life. What was what was the reasoning for that impact? Was it how much they knew about their content? Was it, how well or how not well they implemented classroom rules? Was it, their how they did homework or did not do homework, how they graded your papers? Probably not. If you think about how they inspired and created your ability to learn in their class, or the opposite of that, caused you to have some sort of, you know, loss of love for learning, it's probably more likely about the type of environment that they created and the relationship that you had with them and that they had with the other people in your class. So, the question I want you to think about is, how do you want to inspire and create learning? What type of environment do you want to create and foster so that that learning occurs? So if you consider a student who comes in distracted, let's say from an event that happened on the bus or home, their emotions from that event have taken hold in their body. That cognitive portion of the brain is now busy, so to speak. And learning is going to be unlikely. In order to get that student ready to learn, they need to understand their emotions in order to manage them and regain focus. Therefore, one of the first steps in social emotional learning is emotional literacy. Emotional literacy is being able to name and recognize emotions. There's actually a little over 4,000 words in the English language to explain emotions, and yet we are considered one of an emotionally literate world. So we now know what emotions are, but how do we actually describe them? So, as I said, there are lots of different feeling models out there, emotion models, and the Plutchik model is kind of one of my favorites, created by Robert Plutchik to look at. He studied this to actually with animals, of which humans are, to see how emotions created a psychological response and therefore a behavioral action as a result of that emotion. So the belief is that emotions are a basic psychological response and they help us survive and thrive by focusing our attention to threats or opportunities, therefore motivating our results. We just talked about that in the last video. So again, connecting back to emotions are a bridge to our thoughts, feelings, and actions. We experience something that makes us think. That thinking creates an emotion, and from that emotion, we act. And no emotion is good or bad. Emotions are just data. So if you look at the Plutchik model, you see the 8 primary emotions that were discussed previously there in the darkest color in the center circle. What you notice about the Plutchik model is that each primary emotion has a polar opposite. So, you have admiration, and the polar opposite of that would be, let's say, boredom. Okay. Or you have, this idea of joy, and the opposite of that is sadness. But what Plutchik noticed is that correlates with a behavioral response. Joy, the physiological response to that is to connect, where sadness is to withdraw. Fear, right over here, this puddle, is the opposite of anger. And so when we fear something, we get small and we hide. But when we are angry, we get big and we get loud. And we have anticipation, and the opposite being surprise. When we anticipate something, we examine it closely, but when we're surprised, we jump back. Disgust is the opposite of trust. So when we discuss something, we reject it, we turn it away. But when we trust something, we embrace it and we want it to come closer. Think about how that impacts relationships. Think about how that impacts learning. Think about the last time that were feeling, let's say, joy. What was your behavioral response versus sometime that you were sad? The other interesting thing about this model is that you see parts here where there are no colors. They're just white. And that's actually a mix of two primary emotions. So for example, anticipation and joy. Okay, you combine these two and you get optimism. Joy and trust become love. And as the petals extend out, so we have this whole petal, which is a different mix of orange colors, it actually shows a range of intensity. So it's least intense out towards the edge of the petal and most intense towards the inside of the petal. So the darker shade being the more intense feeling. So if you look to boredom, which is something, we hear a lot in schools, it can become loathing if left unchecked. Building your emotional literacy will help you recognize and name emotions so you know what you need, what step you need to take next. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. This idea of not leaving it unchecked. But this model has a lot of uses for us to not only build emotional literacy, to gain more words to describe how we're feeling, but it also helps us to understand if our students are feeling, let's say they're feeling fear. A minute ago, we just said fear causes them to get small and hide. If they're fearful because they can't do something in the classroom, or they're fearful because of, they're socially anxious, or there's fear going on because of something at home or the bus, well, they're going to get small and hide. And when they're doing that, then they're not at their optimal learning. So there is this opportunity for us to actually explore the Plutchik model. And it's actually an interactive map. So if I were to, let's say, choose, we just talked about fear. So let me choose fear. What we have come up over here is similar words. So it gives us some synonyms. It tells us, like, how we might physically be feeling. It tells us, what does it tell me? Something I care about is at risk. So if it's fear in the classroom, maybe it's, I'm fearing that someone might find out I don't know, or that I'm not as successful as I am, or that, I can't read, or something that they care about. And how does it help us? And then we have this opportunity to change the intensity. So, if it's a high intensity, it's something we would probably call, we could use the word terror, alarm, petrified. We'd be hard to breathe. So not only does this help us on a personal level to use words to help us describe how we're feeling on the correct intensity, but it also helps us see what's going on with our students. If I lower that intensity, so we're back to fear. So if I'm going here to apprehension, I'm worried, I can't relax. Okay. And then the opposite. So again, if we look at the petal, we're at apprehension. The opposite would be annoyance. So if I go to the opposite, annoyance, frustrated, prickly, maybe I'm agitated. So, it tells us a little bit more about how we're feeling. So if I go to ecstasy, the opposite of ecstasy being grief. Now, this over here, it does take you to takes you off this to other articles and other information. If the Plutchik model is still causing some confusion, there is a great video here that talks about the Plutchik model a little bit more that you could certainly watch. And of course, there's always the information down below. But I'd like you to go ahead and hop onto this website, which is in your lesson, and go ahead and explore what you're feeling right now. Do the sensations match up to how you're feeling? And if not, is it perhaps you're not describing your emotion the right way? Not that there's a wrong way, but the intensity level is important when you're describing your emotions.